right, welcome to the Scrum Power Hour. My name is Patty. I am your host today. This is our once a month Fireside Chat where I bring in a guest. It is somebody who has been influential in my life and in my career journey, but also somebody who I know who they are. I know their values, and they agree to come on here and give you the real deal. That is really important to me because I want you to hear some behind the scenes conversation that you may not normally hear in your day-to-day. So I'm excited to bring in somebody, like I said, that was very influential early in my career, but I still enjoy talking to her because she's such an incredible human being. So we're going to get started. And let's see. All right. Well, Riddhi, there you are. Okay, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself. So, of course, your name, where you are, what your current role is, and of course, all the awesome things that you are up to in the Agile community.
I love that. And thank you so much, Patty, for kind of, setting the context of a candid conversation. I am super excited to be here, and feel free to keep your cameras on or off. I am very much looking forward to have a dialogue where we can kind of lean in to some experiences as well as, insights from each other. But just a little bit about myself. As Patty mentioned, my name is Riddhi Gupta, and I'm a transformation leader, having worked in some of the largest financial institutions, leading transformations or actually being entrenched in transformations. That's been kind of my thing for the past decade and a half. But kind of taking us back, I started my career as a software developer. I went to school for computer science and then got my master's in IT. And before that, I was born and raised in India. So there has been a lot of change in my life, if you will. I come from a family of doctors and engineers, and my dad was in the military, so we moved around a lot. So I believe that I was born to be in this role of accepting change and just kind of going with the flow. That's kind of me in a nutshell professionally, but also personally, I'm a mother, I'm married, got 2 kids who kind of keep me honest and also on my toes. And in the community, I really do find an opportunity to give back any way I can. I'm the founder and lead for Women in Agile, which is actually a platform. It's a nonprofit within the Carolinas, which focuses on bringing women and allies together. And we talk about everything, right? Technology, Agile, framework, processes, leadership. And that is also our common connection between Patty and I. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Yes. Well, thank you for introducing yourself. I do have, as you know, some talking points and some questions to ask you, but as the conversation goes on, it becomes more organic and we might kind of veer around the road a little bit. So we've known each other for a while now. You forgot to say where you're currently located.
Oh, that is right. I am in Charlotte, North Carolina right now.
Yeah, so that's how we know each other. I met Riddhi just a few months after you started Women in Agile in Charlotte here. So I showed up at that meetup, but I want you to talk a little bit about your perspective, when we met, how we met, and then I'm going to kind of fill in all the context behind the scenes, what I was dealing with at the time when I was kind of a newbie in this space.
No, absolutely. I believe it was what 3.5 years ago, if I'm, dating ourselves correctly here. But you were introduced to me via one of our common friends, common connections through Women Agile, but also you had the courage to attend one of our meetups. And I still remember that conversation. And I remember the offices where we had the conversation where you walked up to me and explained to me your background being in education and being an educator for so long, and kind of foraying into this world of Agile and Scrum, and kind of your philosophy as to why you were going to be partaking in that crazy world, right? And I was so enamored by the thought of an educator, kind of, utilizing the skills that you've acquired for so long and kind of repurposing that into what was already known as just a technology related field, right? Agile was all technology before it became technology plus. And it was really interesting for me to hear from you that you were taking that plunge. It was very courageous on your part, in my perspective, that you wanted to kind of, leave what you knew unlearn that and learn something new. That was really exciting, and kind of, I wanted to see how that journey played out. And I selfishly asked you to come on out and talk about your experience. I still remember that. I was like, yeah, come and talk about that, because when Women in Agile, when we started, it was just not about Agile. I didn't want to focus just on frameworks and processes. There are far more better people out there who can train you, right? Who can get you certified. I really want to bring speakers who were talking from their experiences. They were talking from in the trenches. They were talking about their challenges, kind of showing their battle scars, if you will. And to me, Patty, you were one of those people who was willingly jumping into a fire of the unknown. And I was thrilled and I was excited for you. And I also wanted to be a part of that journey. So yeah, that was kind of our introduction to each other.
Yes. So kind of to fill in some gaps before, so we met, I think it was 2019. Is that correct? God, and I think about that. First of all, it feels like yesterday. And then when I think about how much has changed since that point, we were doing all in-person meetups. We were kind of contained to our little bubble here in Charlotte, right? I think there were 3 main ones. I don't think any of them have gone in person again. But I got my first full-time Scrum Master role in 2018. It was for a startup here in Charlotte. And I said, oh crap, I got to learn how to do this. So I made a beeline for the Agile meetups. And one of them is Agile in Action, right? It was focused on doing as opposed to just listening to somebody with slide decks. But I showed up there, and that was in, early 2018, and I felt like a fish out of water. So even though at the time that we met, I was still kind of feeling that way, it's interesting that you perceived me as somebody courageous. And I mean, I guess I had to be, but, to your point, I was a former educator. I didn't have a tech background, no coding experience. I had some software development experience, a little bit, leading a project at a business that I owned prior to that. But I felt like an outsider. And to your point, it was all tech at that point. Now we're noticing people from other fields, such as myself, right, coming into the space, and they have a very diverse background. So I'm super supportive of that. But I felt overwhelmed because I had a different background. I was in a startup. Everybody here is corporate. I didn't have the corporate uniform on. I didn't have the corporate speak. I didn't know what I'd walked into. But to your point, I said, I got to learn this, so I got to keep showing up. I have to, because I felt like I didn't have any other choice.
Yeah, and that is the first step, right? I mean, Patty, just by example, showing up is half the battle won, I feel. And I really want to thank everybody for being here. I know a lot of us are kind of on that East Coast time zone where it is technically after hours, including myself. You're investing in yourselves right now. And that is kudos, right? I mean, on a Tuesday night, you could be in your pajamas eating dinner or, catching a glass of wine, watching TV, but it's really about, coming out here and saying, no, I got to make this work for myself. And so I'm going to show up. And that's what you did when you showed up.
Yeah. And I knew I had a story to share. I felt that I needed to share my educational journey, which I do sometimes, and I'm starting to share it more, but I just felt like, as some of you may have seen my posts on LinkedIn the past few days, our educational system is very much designed for a different world, a world of the past. And we're training people to enter that world that doesn't exist anymore. So for me, I felt like I wanted to share that story. And that's when I marched up to you right away. And I'm like, I want to share this, even though we didn't know each other. And it took guts, but I valued that experience because it helped me find my voice concerning something that I was really nervous to share. I felt like nobody would get me, that nobody would take me seriously, but I did it anyway. So thank you for that opportunity. But, it was, you were influential. Some of the other folks, like I could throw out the names, the folks here probably don't know them, but the other folks from Women in Agile, from Agile in Action, so influential on me, whether I talked to them at this point in my life or not, they shaped me. And that's why I wanted to bring you on as one of those people, because it's about building relationships. And I always say this, it's not like a one and done conversation, pick your brain. This is like, we got to get to know each other and then figure out how we can support each other. So, I probably fast forward a few months, right? We were in the same, what's in Charlotte here, the Pink Mentor Network, which is like a women's mentorship organization, I guess you could call it.
Right.
And you were one of the speakers. And I had never heard your story before. All that interaction we had at Women in Agile. And here you come up on the stage, and there were some panelists talking about coming from India. And I'm like, it was like a new level of respect for you and admiration. And I'm like, she's just like me, right? Because she shared her story of struggle. And I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about that today to the folks in the room. Like, what was that like for you to come here? What was the culture shock? How did you adapt? And how has that shaped your journey in your career?
Absolutely. And thank you for providing that forum. And thank you for reminding me, because it was a great platform, the Pink Mentor Network. And for those of you in the Carolinas, definitely look that up, run by my very good friend, Stacey Cassio. Shameless plug there, because she's worked really hard to kind of pull that together for us leaders here within the Charlotte community. So very typical and kind of non-typical immigrant story on my part. My parents decided to essentially move to the US, in particular Charlotte, because we have extended family here for the past 50 years or so. Like I mentioned previously, my dad was in the military. He's a surgeon. He essentially gave that up and decided to pack up his family, my mom and 3 kids, in a few suitcases and said, okay, off to America we go for a better life. And now that I look back, I get goosebumps in the sense that how can somebody mature, have a family with kids, decide to make such a big decision of moving across the 7 seas and reestablishing your roots, right? Luckily for me, my parents were of the mindset of, yes, we can do it, right? So having grown in an environment, it really gave me essentially the foundation of tackling whatever struggles or challenges that I'm faced with even now. My mindset is very much of, let's figure it out. Whatever happens, let's figure it out. But initially, I will say when I moved, I was a shy 18-year-old, going to college. And culture difference aside, there was a lot of other differences that were kind of micro that I didn't really realize till I started getting faced with them. Speaking English was not a barrier, grew up speaking that. Yeah, we had the Queen's English, the grammar is a little different, I get that. Some of the word usage is different. But for the most part, it was okay. I think what I started noticing was when people started pointing out that I was different from them. And I'll give you an example. I was in my engineering 101 class. I went to school for mechanical engineering and then changed my major to computer science. I was one of 5 women students in my engineering 101 class, a class of 100. So I remember sitting in the front, us 5 women and about 90 plus men sitting behind me. And the professor walks in and says, oh, here's my women right here. And we looked around and by golly, we were 5% of the class. And in that moment, I felt different. And then subsequent months went by, I was called as, oh, you are a minority woman. And I didn't realize that I was a minority woman till somebody said that, because you don't notice these things till somebody calls them out, or you have had the experience of feeling different and unique. When I was in college, I essentially took that into my stride as, yes, I am. And I owned it and I worked with it instead of fighting it, right? And the reason I say that is because I always understood to be being unique, being quirky, being different is a superpower, in my opinion. I say that to my kids too, right? I say that to my kids in a way when they feel that they're different or they're the only Indian kids, of Indian heritage in class. I always say that it's cool. It's cool to be different. It's cool to have dark hair. It's cool to have dark eyes. And I say that half in jest, but half in helping them understand that that is your superpower. Now, that is very superficial in a way, right? It's all physicality. But once I started working, I started understanding that my lack of experience was also a superpower. Because when I came to the table for a project or decision making, I came as a blank slate, as a blank canvas. And I asked those questions that people were afraid to ask because they assumed to have the experience. I raised my hand and said, stupid question, no experience. I will ask that anyway. And there were people behind me who wanted people to answer because they had similar questions. So that's kind of my background in kind of moving, countries. It was different. It was challenging at the superficial level of, language and supposed culture and how the school was run, how people interacted. But I really utilized all of that as a sponge. I really did. And I was able to bring my experiences that I grew up with. And quite honestly, that has shaped me who I am today, whether it is my dad's military experience, whether it's my mom's entrepreneurial skills, whether it's me kind of going out there and giving back to the community. I really do feel has shaped me as an empathetic leader. Even though I didn't know that what I was doing was showing empathy, that intentional empathy, I realized that when somebody called that out. And so the reason I say that is sometimes you're doing certain things and you don't realize how they're impacting other people till people, point that out for you. So that's been kind of my initial journey, if you will, here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I don't know. I just can't imagine moving to another country and the culture shock. And, I've often I've moved from New York to the South, and that was like moving to a different country. But I've also done a lot of reading and research that the United States has been developed by different groups of people. And that's developed these 11 nations that we are under the same umbrella, right? And that's why we have a lot of division in our country and, have some strife there, but it does bring a lot of different voices and perspectives to the table. So that's why I said I wanted you to come here and share that, because I know as companies become more and more global and we work with folks around the world, there is, a tendency to think that, we're all humans. Yes, we all have human needs and wants, but cultures are different.
Yes.
People in different countries are different. And I think there's a hesitancy to talk about that because we don't want to feed into stereotypes. Like, it's just a little bit sensitive.
Yeah.
But there are cultural differences. And when I historically for a long time worked with just Americans, or in my background, a lot of women. Yeah. So to come into the tech space and then all of a sudden work with people all over the world, I had to learn about them and learn about them as human beings so I can understand how to help them. Because I didn't want to make an assumption that people think the same way as I do, as an American.
Yeah.
Because they don't necessarily do that. So, as we are, like I said, moving into companies that have offices all over the world, and we work with a lot of folks from India. Mm-hmm. Is there, and I know that people use the term offshore and onshore. I don't like that term. That to me is a little bit of a division, right?
Yeah.
We're all humans of this planet.
Right.
So when we talk about inclusivity and being careful of our language, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about the culture of India and how it's different than the States, so we can understand how to work with our partners in India a little bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And let me kind of answer the question by giving maybe a story, a personal story to set the context a little bit. So for those of you who don't know, I'll be happy to share, since I am acting as an ambassador of my native country right now. But India is a big country, and every state in India has its own culture, food habits, the outfit we wear, the holidays we celebrate, and it's amazing because each state has its own identity. Now, typically, I would be called a North Indian because I'm from the north part of the country. And obviously, in pure Riddhi fashion, I married somebody from southern part of India. So it's exactly own language, absolutely Anu. So I married somebody who does not speak my language, who does not eat the foods that I grew up eating, who culturally has a different background as well. So quite honestly, from the get-go, if working in an American environment was not different enough, I kind of brought that diversity of thought and cultural and background experiences in my home. So, and the reason I set that stage for us before we kind of get into the working mechanism or the working style is you've got to treat people as people first, right? It doesn't matter if you speak their language. It doesn't matter if you dress like them. It doesn't matter if you partake in their food or in their holidays. It is very organic and very innate as they are people first. And they have families and they have children and they're earning a paycheck and they want to do the right thing. They're on this journey with you. I think the reason I'm being so direct about this is I personally dislike and hate when people say things like, our offshore team will take care of it. It is their responsibility. Our nearshore team will take care of it. It is their responsibility. I will get a status from my team in Mexico. I will get a status from my team in Japan. The very fact you call them out in such a way, you're already creating a barrier that is going to be hard to cross. Now, the way I would see it is, I will get a status from John tomorrow. Treat them as people. I will get a status from Anu tomorrow morning when she logs into work. It's the language, it's the thought process, and it is the intention. Now, kind of answering your broader question, Patty, I personally have had the privilege of traveling across 10 countries. When I was working with a firm and setting up transformation, coaching, and execution practices, I was responsible for LATAM, APAC, EMEA, North America, and I've traveled to many countries, and I realized one thing: each one of us is different. I took my playbook that worked great in North America, and I fell flat on my face when I entered China because I did not understand, or I did not take time to understand the people culture there. And the same thing happened in Australia, and the same thing happened in Philippines, right? And the reason I say that it's not about my folks in India or Japan or China. I personally had a blind view when I walked into these conversations as, oh, yes, whatever works here will work there. I was proven wrong, right? And that's why I'm being so candid, because you need to start treating people as people first. So I'm going to answer your question in a very broad way. Is I've had challenges working with folks across teams, across the globe, because I personally have not done the homework of understanding what motivates them at an enterprise level, at a cultural level, and at an individual level, right? I worked with folks who are, very hard workers, young professionals, and that's all they want to do. I worked with folks who have aging parents they want to take care of. I worked with people who are pet parents, right? So the reason I say is everybody's background really parlays into how they show up at work every day. And a couple of things I will say, keep in mind is when you're working with anybody is understand their story, understand their journey, right? And that's why I called you out as courageous and brave, because it is important for people to know that it takes a special way of mindset to kind of put yourself into what I say is the fire of the unknown, because you will burn, you will be challenged, right? But it also grows you in a way, right? It kind of shows you what you're made of. So try to understand, what their background is. Try to understand what motivates them. And then also try to understand how their experiences can be best used for the mission on hand. We sometimes get into a conversation where we regard people as, this is the software development team. But if you get to know them at a personal level, you may know that this one person has product design background. Utilize that, right? So let's not typecast people into those boxes of roles, but let's focus on responsibilities. So those are a few ways that I've tried to bridge the gap.
Yeah, that amazing stuff. Of course, that's why I'm like, you got to come here and talk to my meetup. Just there's so much there, and I always enjoy watching this video back as an observer, right? Because I'm participating in this conversation, but I always see and hear even more when I watch the video back and I'm editing it. So I'm excited. I'm excited for that. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges you have faced as a woman of color? I mean, and a woman as well, right? But also a woman of color in the tech industry, in the corporate world, and throw in some stuff about being a working mom.
Yeah,
because that's all part of it.
absolutely. Oh yeah. I have a lot of variables here, right? So I was the only woman in my graduating class, kind of joining a firm. So we were like 6 people who interviewed and got into a firm for our first jobs, and I was the only woman in that class. I was, like I said, one of 5 women in my engineering 101 class. I was the only woman of color in both those instances as well. I was the only Indian woman in a room full of people when it came to multiple projects, like too many to count even, right? I was also called out as, wow, you're from India, but you speak so well. Your English is so good. And it was funny because when I heard that, my first reaction was, yeah, we speak English in India among 6 other languages, you know? And it was funny because I didn't understand where they were coming from, right? Exactly, right? I didn't understand why was their ignorance, because, and it was no fault of theirs, it was just the system they grew up in, right? So when I was called out as being, an Indian woman who spoke great English and who was ambitious, who also wanted to come back to work after giving birth to 2 kids, I was called out on that as well, because apparently the stereotype that I was faced with in my world was, well, Indian women, they have kids, they don't come back to work. And I was like, where'd you hear that from? So those were one part of the stereotypes that I was working with. The other type were in tech, there were not a lot of leaders who looked like me remotely, right? Talk about Indian woman leader. Yes, you'll see a lot of them, but I did not see them in my span of control. I didn't see a woman mentor. I didn't see an Indian woman or woman with Indian heritage who came back to work after having children. And again, in my cohort, in my community. So those things, when I was faced with, I think it gave me wings, to really be able to fly a little bit higher. And I'm not saying in rank or in role, but responsibility, right? I almost felt that if I don't see somebody that I need, I'm going to become that somebody, right? And I'm not always successful. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not always successful. It's always a little dance that you do, right? You go 2 steps forward, you take 1 step back, you go lateral, you go left. It's like a jungle gym out there, right? So it's always not linear or a ladder. But yeah, those were the things that were pointed out to me. And I do believe in positive intent. So I do believe 99.5% of those instances or those call outs were done in pure innocence. It wasn't to put me down, or it wasn't meant to discourage me. It was more like, hey, you're here, right? That's awesome. And I've been very privileged because I've had mentors, I've had sponsors, I've had advocates, and it started from my childhood, right? My parents, my father, my husband, I mean, all of them have been huge role models and have been advocates and sponsors personally for me to do well, to kind of do my thing, right? And same thing goes professionally. I've had, male managers and gentlemen advocates who have spoken for me, and as well as women. So I do believe in, allies a lot. I really do believe they're important for our success. But just to kind of, add to that, when I did get called out on my differences, my unique unique uniqueness, if you will. I actually took that as something that I wanted to explore further. So starting from my first job, I started, giving my time as a mentor to newer fresh graduates who were coming into the company. I went back to my alma mater. I still do that. I go back to UNC Charlotte and speak at their events whenever opportunities present themselves. I come to events such as this wherever I can have a forum where people are open to a candid conversation, because by now I'm very transparent, right? I want people to know that there are challenges and there are successes, right? They kind of go hand in hand. But so that's my way to kind of representing myself, so somebody can look at me and say, oh, you know what, I can understand her, I associate with her. You don't have to be another woman of Indian origin. You could be a gentleman of any persuasion, right? But it's about the experiences that I bring to the table of being different, being unique, not fighting my stereotypes. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in stereotypes, and I don't believe in fighting the stereotypes. It's more the alignment of thoughts that I'm concerned with, right? So if there's something, and I've been asked, blunt questions in terms of, well, how do you talk like this? Or, what did you do differently to change your accent? And I'll say the story. Well, my kids think that I have an Indian accent. Like, there's certain words I'll say, and they're little, mom, we're so Indian, and it's cute because in their mind, right, their mom is absolutely Indian. Like, I just moved from India yesterday, right? I know you can identify, especially when you're teenagers, they have no filter. But then on the other side, I get, well, you speak so well. Your grammar is so great, and it's interesting because those comments come from their experiences. And I assume positive intent. I never take it as they're calling me out as a person who is different, but I take it as, oh, I'm representing somebody or something they don't know about. So let's have some fun with that. So that's been kind of my motto so far.
Oh, that's amazing. That's why I said, I love your mindset. I love your attitude. And I feel like because you have this growth mindset and this positive intent mindset, that you've been able to overcome the challenges associated with all of that, because it's very easy to kind of shrink back into the corner. And I've dealt with imposter syndrome. I've dealt with like the fear around telling my story because people aren't going to think I'm worthy. And it takes a lot of courage. Mm-hmm. But the folks that continue to push themselves out of their comfort zone are the ones that can move mountains, so to speak. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if I may, Patty, trust me when I say there are days, multiple days and instances when I sit back and think about things I've already said, right? I do a retrospect with myself. Could I have said something better? Could I have been a little bit more assertive in a meeting? Did I just get rolled over, right? Did somebody just, talk all over me? All those things have happened. Trust me. I've been in situations where I've been on mute and I'm trying to get a word in, but there is no opportunity to get a word in and the meeting is over. And I kick myself and say, I should have been a little bit more aggressive, right? So trust me, that happens. And I think that happens to a lot of women, where you have a thought and you spend time articulating it in your mind, but by the time you try to get it out of your mouth, the time has passed, the context has passed. And I've been in situations where people have made decisions on my behalf without me knowing. Mm-hmm. Trust me when I say that those things have happened. And trust me when I say that I've sat in a corner and sulked, right? And I still do that. But that's where I feel there's growth. Mm-hmm. If you can recognize that you are sitting in a corner and sulking about something that happened, that is growth right there, because you can take that forward as something you don't want to do again or do it differently. If you don't even acknowledge that you've done that, you're never going to grow. And I'll give you an example. Imposter syndrome. I was flying high a few years ago professionally, and I got pulled into a conversation and engagement. And I thought, yes, this is something I've done before. I'm going to rock it out of the park. It is going to be amazing. Fell flat on my face. And it wasn't overconfidence on my part. There were a lot of moving parts. There were certain toxic behaviors around me, which I failed to recognize. So I've been in those situations as well. And then I recognized, but I didn't do anything about it because I was scared and nervous. It was a pandemic. I didn't want to rock the boat, right? I was a working mom. Yeah, those things happen even with me, but I haven't forgotten about them. That's the thing. You can forgive yourself. Give yourself some grace, right? In that moment, you didn't act a certain way, but don't forget about them, because if you forget about them, you're not really learning. But don't sit there and fester about it. You've got to make that peace with yourself, because who you were 2 years ago, you're not that same person right now.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the learnings I have for myself is I never forget about things that have challenged me or that have made me sweat, and sweat is real, right? That is absolutely real. I don't forget about them. But what I do end up doing is I do noodle over them and think about, if I were presented in the same scenario, what would I do differently? How would today's Riddhi act compared to 2 years ago? So those are kind of my mechanisms of moving forward.
Yeah. I think there's some forgiveness in there, right? You forgive yourself for making the choices you did in the past and always making sure you learn from them. To your point, don't forget and push yourself possibly into uncomfortable places to not make the same decisions again. Yeah, I've lived that. I've lived that too. So it's not easy, but you will turn around and realize, oh my gosh, look at how far I've come because I have continuously taken those steps.
Oh,
absolutely. The last question I want to get to before we open for question and answer is, tell us about your passion for diversity inclusion and, starting Women in Agile in Charlotte and the impact that you've seen your values and your mission have, because you put yourself out there to do these things. What has the impact been on our local community in Charlotte, but of course, beyond Charlotte?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So I was at a conference about 4 years ago when I was introduced to Women in Agile. Women in Agile is a US-based nonprofit, which now has, obviously, it's gone global, right? We have chapters and groups across the world. So I was in a conference and I was really taken by the speakers, the mindset, and the mission. And the mission was really simple. It was really a platform for women, to talk about Agile, right? And believe it or not, we still have disparity in tech. And of course, agility and Agile being a part of that, there is disparity, there is lack of, diversity, lack of equity as well as inclusion there. So like I said, I've always looked at myself as being fortunate enough to essentially move the needle forward when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been very privileged. I've been very honored to work with a lot of like-minded individuals who've been my sponsors, my advocates. But I also know a lot of us don't have that privilege. A lot of us don't have that support system. They don't have what I have or what you have, right? And there are times that even I don't have that. So I recognize that. So in a way, in a very selfish way, to bridge that gap, I also wanted to learn from the community, right? Because I didn't know a lot of things. I still don't know a lot of things. So I said, after coming back from the conference, that I'm going to go ahead and start a group, because the Charlotte, Carolinas agility scene was really picking up the last 5 years or so. And I was seeing a lot of progress being made in the bigger financial institutions. Everybody was trying to be agile, going agile, doing daily stand-ups. So there was a lot of rah-rah going on, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and open that. And with the help of a few friends, I promised them all beverages and cookies after and said, we're going to do this. We're going to call it Women in Agile Charlotte Metro. My first event, actually my mentor and my manager at that time, I invited him to speak at the event along with another leader that I knew in the Agile world, and had a sponsor come on out and help us with that. Fast forward close to 4 years now, next February, it has become a movement, right? I've had a few people join me as a part of the leadership team, and we try to bring curated events every few months. The last 3 years, we've been doing them monthly, even through the pandemic. We were virtual. I've had CIOs, CEOs, Really, really cool industry folks come on out and talk about agility, mentorship, leadership, how to work in this crazy world of COVID, all that good stuff. I've had my sister, who's a physician, come on out and talk about what does COVID mean from a mental health perspective, right? Talk about, what the world went through. I know personally it was the same storm, but we all had different boats. I had two kids who were struggling with online remote learning. I have parents who are immunocompromised living with us. And then both my husband and I were juggling our jobs. It was a circus, right? So it was fantastic because we were able to talk about these real topics and move away from just frameworks and processes. We were talking about the human aspect of agility. So we pivoted. We essentially said it's women and allies. We need everybody, right? We're not just going to go in a little shell in a silo and talk about this. And it became a movement, Patty, right? We were able to create 17 new opportunities for women and allies the past 3 years. I've had sponsors as well as partners come on out and help us with the events. We actually, through the pandemic, had a community sponsor as well as a community partner, like a nonprofit, work a relationship with us every month, whether it was charity, whether it was mentorship they were providing. So it really became a stop for people to talk about everything. And that's how we were able to really expand our influence. So it kind of moved away from just being Charlotte. I have speakers come on out from the UK. We've had participants from all over the world, from India, from Japan, because, virtual. People were like, yeah, I want to expand my growth mindset. What can I do? And we would go and advertise that on LinkedIn and Meetup. And we really got a lot of love and a lot of, cooperation, collaboration from our community. So that's been kind of the impact that we are making. And actually today we had a field day. A lot of us were out, meeting with our sponsors and partners for next year because we were planning a great next year. So it's been great. And quite honestly, at the end of the day, you and I met through that. I made some really cool people through Women in Agile and who I can actually call friends and professional friends, right? I can call them and say, hey, listen, I have this one person who's looking for a job. Do you have something opening up in your organization? I hate the word network. It seems very sterile. It seems very, plain. It's all about relationship building. And I've seen that happen over the course of years where I'll connect to people and 2 years later, they're working together. And it's brilliant because it's more organic that way. And it's not, it's not pushed, if you will. So yeah, that's been Women in Agile for me. And we're super excited about, obviously, our end of year event, which is going to happen on December 6th. Please find us on Meetup and of course the next year as well.
Yeah, I love that. It's amazing, because my mind is going to like all of the people that, you're talking about, right? And again, like in the Charlotte community, we know who these people are, but right, the reason that I sought out these meetups and building relationships with the people that showed up over and over and over, it's because the networking comment, right? Like I hate that word. To me, that's like old school. Like you show up, you hand your business card. What can you do for me? We're in these communities together learning. Mm-hmm. And years down the road, to your point, you hook up somewhere in a company and you work together and you're like, wow, I met this person 3 years ago at this, Charlotte meetup. And, yeah. Like I said, these folks, I count them as really mentors for me. And I know that like, if I called up David Brown, yeah, anybody knows him, right? Follow him on LinkedIn. If I called up David Brown tomorrow, he'd be like, of course, Patty. And I haven't talked to him in years. Yeah. Yeah. It's because we built this relationship while we were in that meetup. And he was so influential, because after I spoke to Women in Agile about my educational journey, he worked with me. I met with him and we reworked that presentation to have an activity so I could do it at Agile in Action. Yeah. And it was interesting because it was a different audience. So majority men. And like, I was nervous. Yeah. I'm like, are they going to accept this? Because again, it's as a woman, it's in your mind, like,
Oh, for
they're going to
sure.
reject me. And no,
Oh,
they
yeah.
weren't. I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did it, right?
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that's very natural, right? I mean, to your point, you're creating a tribe, you're creating a village around you. And I always say this, I need a village to essentially raise me. I have my own little village when it comes to schools and kids. I have my own village when it comes to my day to day. And then I have my professional village. And I'm that person, like I said, raising my hand saying, hey, I don't know what this is. I need to kind of, pick your brain a little bit. Let's meet for coffee, what have you. And that's the beauty of humanity.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And if there's one benefit from the pandemic, it's opened the humanity up to because to your point, we'd still be in our little Charlotte bubble.
Yeah.
Right. Going to these in-person meetups if COVID never happens. Now look at us.
Yeah.
And now look, we can interact with people all over the world very easily. And to your point, understand who they are as human beings so we can have empathy. So for me, I know COVID is very difficult, and it was a very difficult time, those 2 years where we were like locked in the house, but I see the blessings in it. And this meetup is one of them. So well, let me open up the floor here to the audience. I mean, you can just kind of raise your hand or whatever, and you can speak out. You don't have to put it in the chat. Let's just talk, right? Who has a question? Hey, Arlen.
Hey.
Hey, you.
I don't have a question, but this was like really wonderful because it sounds like the experiences that she has, I have the same experiences and still having those experiences as a Black man in tech, right? And it's, I've been in tech for going on 15 years, but just hearing that, and I believe I put it in the chat that how did you put it?
Being unique is a superpower.
Exactly. And that's how I approach it every single day, because being like you, in the work that I do, I'm like the single minority. I'm like the only Black person in the entire company or on the entire team. So coming with that, the approach, saying like, hey, I'm not singling myself out, but this is also a superpower. I use that to my advantage and I leverage that, and I don't acknowledge it. But I become an ally with other people, and then I kind of take up for other people as well who are in that same had that same dynamic. So that was very well said, because that's how I approach my work and the things that I do at work on a day-to-day basis. That's how I approach that. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. The other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is just creating that space, right? It's really about, if you don't identify with somebody's thought process, if you don't align with what they're trying to do, create that space.
Yep.
And it's okay to talk about it. I think a lot of us shy away. It's not because we don't acknowledge it or we don't want to talk about it. It's more about, we're not comfortable about it, right?
Yep.
And what I say is just create that space to be uncomfortable.
Yes. And Arlen is awesome. He was one of our Fireside Chat guests a number of months back. So that's up there on YouTube. I know I've gotten such incredible feedback about that one, Arlen, but I think you're awesome. So I'm so excited you're here. Because, Arlen, you went out, and people can watch the video, but you went out into your company and you built relationships with people that QA has never had relationships with.
Yeah.
And like the stories that you've told about that are incredible, because it takes a lot of courage.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you have your own superpowers. So I'm glad to know you.
I love that.
Do one more question. We have Ange, and then we are going to wrap it up here. So what you got for us?
I guess a comment. I've always, because I'm a white person, I actually am always nervous sometimes to say things, because again, like I said, I grew up in a white suburbia. Like I grew up with biases, and I didn't mean to. So I really appreciate that you said that you're you're coming from the perspective of you're not upset, that you don't believe that it's malicious, because I feel sometimes like if I say something inadvertently that maybe I shouldn't have, it's coming as something malicious. And I actually generally don't like to say this because I recognize that obviously I do have a privilege. I didn't ask for it. Just because of my appearance, I do. So I really appreciate you saying that, because I find that sometimes I don't want to speak up, or I don't want to say, or I don't even want to ask questions because I don't want it to come off as sounding terrible or bad. So sometimes I don't even know how to react. My nature is, hey, let's get to know each other, because I am a people person. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate that perspective, because I've never heard that before. So it makes me encouraged that maybe folks like me, who really are never coming from a bad place, can get through.
No, thank you for sharing that, Ange, and I really appreciate the candor. And I know it took a lot from your perspective to even share that. So I want to applaud you for sharing that with us. I do consider this as a safe environment. I know Patty creates that environment for us, right? And you're not alone in that feeling. There are times that even I feel the same way, because you've heard me throughout this past hour. I've said it 3 times already that I do feel privileged myself, right? I've had the support, I've had the advocacy, I've had the sponsorship from my male managers, the gentlemen present in my life as well, right? So I come from a place of privilege and entitlement sometimes as well, and I'm not afraid to share that. Now, just because I look different doesn't mean that I can't have a privileged experience, right? That's the other side of the coin. So at the end of the day, you have to recognize that all of us have our own experiences that we bring to the table. Now, having said that, once I've also had the experience of not being heard. I've also dealt with imposter syndrome. I've also been looked at, oh, you young thing, right? Just because I choose to dress in bright colors. And this is a true story. I was in an elevator and somebody called me out for wearing bright colors. And I thought, well, thank you. That was my response to them, right? So I do believe it's also the mindset that I carry forward. Now, in that moment, I can choose to say, well, what do they mean by that? Am I too young dressed? Or maybe it's not appropriate. I'm in corporate America. I just said, thank you. That's it. And you move forward, because you do make certain decisions throughout the day, right? Which feed into other decisions that you're going to be making. So if you do assume positive intent, it does help. But there have been multiple times where I don't want to assume positive intent. I can take offense with a blink of an eye, right? So you sharing this with us today is very telling. I really applaud you for that. And please know you're not the only one. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
It immediately made me think of something that I watched a couple of weeks ago. Brene Brown has a new Netflix show called Courage. I think it's a special. And that's one of the things she said, like, we've got to have the conversations, and we're going to say the wrong thing. We're going to mess up. And it takes courage to try, but, have the dialogue, say positive intent, right? Because you're trying to learn. And the only way you can learn is to mess up. And it's scary.
Yes,
but that's why we're here today, to kind of talk and have the conversation. And hopefully we walk away realizing something new, and we make a different choice tomorrow, whether that's what we do, what we say, how we see somebody. Because we're all in different places on our journey, and we have to, this is one thing that I learned from teaching and practicing yoga. You got to meet people where they are, and have empathy for where they are, and understand that everybody's needle move is going to be different. And that doesn't make it easy.
That's what they call it, growing pains.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming here, Riddhi. I like I said, I've been so excited for you to come for a long time now, longer than before I asked you to come here. So just so you know,
thank you so much.
Tell us how we can connect with you, and we'll wrap up our evening here.
Absolutely. LinkedIn, That's the best way. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And if you just send me a quick note, we'll be connected. And then if you would like to have further conversations offline, I'll be happy to share my email address as well. But if you're all on LinkedIn, that's the best way to connect with me.
Okay, super. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
everybody for showing up and engaging in this dialogue, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Good night.